ברוכים הבאים לכנס הרצליה 2024.
Herzliya conference. If we hear sirens, you must remain seated in your place for 10 minutes. It's important to remain seated in order to avoid any harm, and we will all become better friends if we have to sit together through a siren. We'll have a great time. We will start the conference with a moment of silence in memory of all those who have been murdered, the IDF fatalities, the IDF and security forces fatalities on October 7th and following that in the Iron Swords War. Please rise. The names of soldiers from Reichman University who have been killed: Major Benjamin Benji Trakinski, Major in Reserves Dror Zimmer, Major in Reserves Moshe Yedidia Leiter, Arnon Zmora from the Israel Police of blessed memory, Gidon Chai Dero, Staff Sergeant in Reserves, Staff Sergeant in Reserves David Schwartz, Staff Sergeant in Reserves Yosef Githerz, Staff Sergeant in Reserves Omer Balwa, Ini Nachman Liam Shrem Omri Ram of blessed memory. You may be seated. We have here with us in the audience the President's wife, Mrs. Michal Herzog. Welcome. She is a friend of this university and has been one for so many years. Thank you so much for everything that you've done and the dozens of students whom you've helped and which you're still helping. So thank you so much for being here. I must note Daniel Husidman because you are sitting in the Husidman Hall, and if Daniel Husidman would not have been here, our hombre, then we wouldn't have had a hall. So thank you very much, Daniel Husidman. And I would like to introduce Professor Boaz Gadnor, the president of the Reichman University. It's not easy being the president of the Reichman University when you start your term in a war and 55% of your students are drafted, called up for reserve duty. You need to somehow navigate this ship very cleverly, with patience and with leadership. And we all owe Professor Gadnor. We owe you. I'd also like to greet Professor Rafi Melnik, the outgoing president. I'd also like to greet our dear friend Joey Lowe, who helps this university a lot, and your excellencies, ambassadors and consuls. I'm delighted to introduce Major General in Reserves Amos Gilad, the chair and the head of the IPS conferences, the Institute for Planning and Strategy of the Reichman University. His name precedes him, and in every conference I suggest take out a pen and paper, write down what he says, and if you want to do some public diplomacy and advocacy abroad, you have a strategic summary that is worth gold, and you'll even sound as if you know what you're talking about. I have personal experience. I simply quote the former Major General, and all of a sudden I sound like a Major General. It's as simple as that. A few months before the war, I came back from the Gaza border area, very excited. The head of the regional council told me about a new industrial zone collaboration with Gaza. He told me about tens of thousands of workers who will come into Israel from Gaza and help construction and GDP, and there were less rockets, there was hope for collaboration, and I was caught up in this conception. And I told him when I came back that I think that there's a full half of the cup and that there is hope for coexistence. But Amos said very simply in clear terms that he would like to teach me a word in Arabic, Hayat tichtati ben. A venomous snake, the most venomous, told me Amos, because Tiben means beneath the straw in the spring. The most venomous snake, and it's just like the story about the frog and the scorpion, that ultimately it's in our nature to kill Jews and we just can't help it. Amos was not deceived by the conception I was, but he warned me, Amos, the floor is yours. We're running a bit late, so I'll try and be as brief as possible. Madam, the President's wife, Mrs. Michal Herzog, that I've had the privilege of knowing her. I won't mention how many years. I'm now closer to the time in which I'm going to ask Jonathan. I have a contract with him to eulogize me. Joe Lowe, and of course Professor Boaz Gano, all of our dear friends, Mr. Miki Federman, Jeremy Sisharov, our entire family, but I'll move on straight to the matter at hand. I would simply like to share with you the main message of this conference. But before I start doing that, I'd like to apologize on behalf of Professor Uriel Reichman, who is sick with COVID for the third time now. It even caught up with him. I'm sure he will recover soon, but that's why he is not here to open this conference as he usually does with the important conference, just like the ICT conference, our conference, and other conferences. So I'd like to get to the point. And my message, which I formulated for decades, but now it's even more clear, we are at a junction in which our military might must join forces with the intelligence of diplomacy. Some people don't understand how strong the IDF is, and it has achieved some exceptional tactical achievements. But when that is, when you do not add to that some strategy, some political diplomatic strategy, you get results like the ones we have. And there's one message I'd like to convey to the political echelon, and hopefully they'll agree. Today is a historic date. There are interim conclusions, and there are a lot of warning signs in the Gaza Strip, Hamastan, and there's a lot to analyze here with respect to the intelligence and the military, but I'm going to skip over that. There are a lot of tactical achievements made by the army, and the outcome is that this can lead to some kind of diplomatic action. What does that mean? We must not be dragged into direct military occupation of Gaza. Gaza is a disaster zone. I was responsible for Gaza on behalf of the IDF twice in my life as the COGAT, the coordinator of government affairs in the territories. And I have to say that if we get dragged into direct occupation, or according to some people's deranged illusions, to establish Jewish communities or settlements there, that means we will be responsible for 2.2 million people, and that means it will be our burden, our budgetary burden, our moral burden, and we won't be able to manage that. It's only the IDF that can manage that, but the outcome will be miserable and will destroy our relations with the world, with the US and the free world. It's true that Israel and China together are 1.4 billion people, or Israel and India, then we're 2.8 billion people, but I cannot divulge the internal division or breakdown within that, because that's a secret. But if we don't grasp the opportunity that's being handed to us by the US and establish a strategic axis with Saudi Arabia at its center, a country that was responsible for the Wahhabiyya, the most radical stream of Islam, even worse than Shiite Iran in certain respects. And if we don't join forces with the Emirates in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, which is a strategic home front for Israel, and the security relations between us are a strategic asset for Israel, and Egypt, that the late Prime Minister Menachem Begin and the late President of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, they signed a very brave historic contract. And today I can tell you that it's a main pillar of Israel's national security. If such a thing should occur, and it's not just a fantasy somebody dreamed up of a new Middle East, we will benefit from strategic strength, military strength, a very strong bond with the US and with Arab countries. All that already exists today. The security relations, without getting into details, are outstanding, but there's a question mark hovering over all of them because of the situation we might find ourselves get messed up in Gaza. Number two, if the hostages do not return alive to Israel, it will be a stain on Israel for eternity. This is why we are devoting the opening session to the people who have been harmed by Hamas's strategy and who were brutally attacked, but it's a part of an entire complex. I'm personally not convinced that the government, and specifically the Prime Minister, did everything they could in order to bring them back for various considerations I won't get into right now, but it is a basic Jewish value to bring them back. It's a human duty, and it's an important component of our national security. And every minute there that men and women are spending time there, it will be a disaster. Just like Katzetnik once defined Auschwitz, and he said every minute there is eternity. I don't care, they could pay any and every price. Some people beg to differ, but I'm telling you that it's important strategically as well. And if there is such an agreement, and based on the IDF achievements in the Gaza Strip, I think that we can develop or realize or bring into effect an arrangement in Lebanon. Will it be stable? No. Some people think that perhaps it would be best if we attack Hezbollah right now. Yeah, maybe there is a rationale there, but I have the opposite rationale. We need to rehabilitate, we need to pause, we need to use our brains, we need the help of the US, and we need to build ourselves. And now I'd like to move on to the main threat, and the way we'll address it has to do with the main thing I'm talking about, and that's the Iranian threat. Since 1996, I had the honor to submit to the Prime Minister back then in the previous century, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, the intel assessment regarding the Iranian threat. Back then, it didn't have the capabilities it has today. Today, it's a nuclear threshold country. What does that mean? If I'll quote the American Chief of General Staff, because he said this publicly, in a matter of several months, it can have nuclear weapons. Why are nuclear weapons dangerous? First of all, it's dangerous that a country with a strategy and ideology to destroy Israel will have such weapons. It mustn't happen. Some people say they'll never use it. I know of one way that they'll never use it. If they simply don't have it, it will start a nuclear arms race. And number three, we've seen it now. They will provide deterrence to all terrorist organizations, just like, that fly that eats up the palm trees. They'll eat them from inside. Look at Yemen, Syria, Lebanon. All these countries have become proxies of Iran, and together, based on Qasem Soleimani's vision, whom we got rid of, but we did not get rid of his vision, they form this firewall launched at Israel. And if they have nuclear capabilities, then we will be in a very dire situation. So we need to do everything we can today in order to build our military might based on the lessons we learned in this war, and a diplomatic might based on our alliance with the US and other Western countries. The IDF already belongs to CENTCOM. It's a vast organization that brings together all the chiefs of general staffs of the Arab militaries, and we've heard that the IDF chief of general staff met with all the Arab chiefs of general staffs, and we saw how we managed to deter Iran based on Israel's strength and based on the regional alliance things that not much is said about, and also based on American strength and British and others. Israel needs to constantly bring together its diplomatic knowledge and military might. And now I'd like to say a few words about Judea and Samaria. There is amazing activity held there by the IDF, the ISA, and the Intel Directorate to thwart terrorist attacks, but there's a competing strategy, therefore the right strategy, which strives to annex Judea and Samaria and then to annex the Gaza Strip. And if we do that, we will find ourselves in the international courts. The wheels of these processes are already in motion. These processes, these monstrous processes, the wheels of that terrible machine have started rolling, and without an American Iron Dome and without the legitimacy of the international system, Israel will be harmed both politically and militarily and economically. All that is within the scope, within the purview of the Israeli government's decision making. Either we take the turn to the left or we take a turn to the right, and that will lead to a terrible disaster. So therefore, my message, since we are a bit short of time, my message is we are at a historic intersection between military might and diplomatic savvy, and we're choosing various slogans regarding various victories that will never happen if we find ourselves in the quagmire of Gaza or that boiling place, Judea and Samaria, filled with unrest. And even though if we will win at the end, there will be a terrible price. But if we have the political and diplomatic savvy and the military might, we can avoid that. This is what I wanted to share with you at the short time I allotted to myself, and I recommend we can each have your own opinions. We have some very diverse sessions planned, and people will, of course, speak their minds, but ultimately, this is the main axis on the path of strategic surprises, so that we will not find ourselves facing such a terrible surprise. And I could give you an entire lecture about the Intel failure and other failures, but we need to recover. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, there's a horizon, and it's all up to us. That was the main message. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to thank the President's wife, and I would like to wish us all an interesting conference. I would like to thank you all. Hopefully there will be some very fruitful and important discussions that will contribute to overall thinking and perhaps even to policy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amos Gilad, the chair of the Herzliya conference series. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to continue the conference, the 2021, the 21st Herzliya conference, which focuses on the path of strategic surprises. We chose to open with a session which we think is exceptionally important. It will focus on the horrific acts of Hamas against women as a strategy. We are committed to remember and never to forget the horrific acts committed by Hamas terrorists, and we are going to continue to remind the world that certain parts of it are turning a blind eye on the massacre of October 7th and the horrors committed by Hamas. And we wish to, and we will emphasize time and again that harming women is an inherent part of the plans and strategy of the Hamas terror organization. We are going to open this session with an interview with the wife of the President of the State of Israel that ever since the massacre of October 7th has been deeply involved in this topic. And I am honored now to invite Miri Michaeli, a chief anchorwoman on I-24 News, a journalist and a lecturer. Miri, please. And now I'm honored to invite Mrs. Michal Herzog, the wife of the President of the State of Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you, Mrs. Michal Herzog. I'd like to thank all of you for placing this important topic at the top of this conference's agenda. It is a great privilege for us to speak out and cry out this terrible cry of the men and women who suffered such terrible violence but cannot speak in their own voice because they have been murdered, massacred, and burned. And with your permission, I'd like to move on to the issue because the most impossible question nowadays is, how are you? So, of course, we're not going to talk about all the terrible testimonies, but we can say that one can see very, very clearly that this is an intentional strategy. We've seen the same pattern time and again in different arenas, and the sadistic violence and the necrophilic tendencies appear time and again, not by coincidence, and the world remains silent. First of all, hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me. Just like Jonathan said, this place, the Reichman University, is very dear to my heart, has been for many years, and I feel that whenever I come to the campus, another building was born. So thank you, Daniel, for this beautiful building, and thank you, Miri, and I wish you the best of luck as the new TV channel goes on air. It adds another facet to Israeli media, so thank you so much. Yes, we are living now in some very difficult times. Let's say that when my husband was elected as president, we never expected that this is what his term of office would look like. We started by swearing in when we still had the COVID discussions, and this is a good opportunity to wish best of health to Professor Reichman. And then we continued with some very difficult months after the recent elections. We tend to talk about October 7th and its aftermath, but sometimes we forget or perhaps repress everything that occurred here in the months leading up to October 7th, and then we reached the horrors of October 7th. And with all the chaos of these first days, it took me a few days as well to understand exactly what had happened on October 7th with respect to the planned, premeditated sexual violence that was adopted as a strategy in several locations. And once I understood that, I decided to take this as an important theme, an important topic, because this is a topic that Hamas has no answer for, because we all see how in the media and the social media platforms, let's say that we're not doing a very good job, but when it comes to this topic, it's consensus, and this is why it's so important for us as well as Israelis to continue and make sure that it remains on the world stage, because this topic, this is a subject that Hamas has no answer for. Because when people say to the world, when I say rape should not be a tool of war, sexual violence is not a weapon of war, period, well, there's consensus regarding that, and we should really make sure that this subject, people won't forget about it, especially in view of how, at the beginning, how the international organizations ignored this topic. Well, with your permission, I'd like to talk about how they ignored it. It took 50 days for the UN to issue a denouncement. One sentence, world leaders, we will never forget their denial, and even afterwards, the denominations were very, very weak. And after I was offended as a Jew and as an Israeli and as a woman, what happened to this solidarity between women, the I believe you. How can an Israeli woman today deal with this hypocrisy of the women's organizations in the world and the world in general? And well, I'd like to make a distinction between leaders and international organizations. From the leaders, we did see denouncements. We saw a series of leaders who came here immediately at the beginning of the war, both male and female leaders, Ursula von der Leyen, Annalena Baerbock, who's here today, the German foreign minister. We definitely did hear that voice, but the blind eye, those who ignored us were mainly the international organizations. Amos talked about the importance of Jordan, and I agree, if I may, not as a strategist, but regretfully, the person who heads the UN's women organization, there's a Jordanian woman. Her name is Sima Barhus, and from the get-go, and that has been her line, this is her line until now, she has simply ignored this matter. And Israeli women who are experts in international law, people like Professor Ruth Halpern-Kadari and Ifat Beaton, and I'm truly so proud of them. They fought in order to make their voice, to make the voice of these women heard. These women who can no longer have their voice heard because they've been murdered, and they made every effort to make that voice heard. And for the first time after the war, when I met Professor Ruth Halperin-Kadari, and she's a very serious woman, you know, usually she's very calm and collected, but she was almost in tears from how her friends, how her peers in the CEDAW UN committee, the committee that addresses women's rights in the UN, she was a member of that committee for 12 years. She was deputy chair, and how they ignored this topic, it was unbearable for her, and we continue to talk about it. And like I said, we continue to maintain this as a topic, and there has been a certain shift, especially after the report of Mrs. Pramila Patten, the Undersecretary General of the UN. She came to Israel. We hosted her at the President's residence. We invited 13 organizations that focus on women's rights and sexual violence since October 7th. We invited them to meet her, and still her report, which indeed mentioned it, and regretfully I maintain personal contact with them regularly, and I spoke with her just 2 days ago. She now is under such an attack, personally, a personal attack, because she has moral clarity. And now she is the target of so much hatred because of the truth that she spoke. And you talk about this topic in a lot of fora, and among other things you use, I've noticed, the strategy of warning from the escalation in the next war in using sexual violence.
I can't help but think, is this the only thing that works? Because when Jewish women are victims of such horrific violence, it simply doesn't interest people, and it only starts to interest them when there's a potential warning involved that it may touch on their lives. I don't want to talk about this only as a demonstration of anti-Semitism. I would prefer to look at there's no positive side, but the activist, proactive side of things. Because, for example, when I'm invited to speak in the Security Committee in Munich, in a panel hosted by a woman, and there's a person there that 10 years ago dealt with the Nigerian women that were kidnapped by the Boko Haram organization, then yes, you do want to talk about it and make it universal, this violence against women. And I think that's the right way to do it, to make it and maintain it as what it is, a universal issue. And I'm saying it's not only the voice of Israeli women. What happened on October 7, and all of the experts in the world are saying this, that was above and beyond. The acts of brutality, first on the 7th of October, the rapes, sadly also rapes of women, even after they were murdered. This is such extreme manifestation of violence in conflict, and specifically violence, sexual violence against women. And we know the world is very turbulent. There will be more conflicts ahead. And I think it's our role as women to prevent the use of sexual violence in the next conflict, because they may make it even more extreme yet again. And that's something that I'd like to do, and that's also part of the message that really connect women everywhere in the world. And it's very important to you. I mean, I wish they talked about our specific subject here the way they talk about the Nazidic women in Boko Haram. But we saw something very concerning, a phenomenon, maybe it's not a phenomenon, but an event of a 12-year-old child, a girl in France that was raped, anti-Semitic rape. Even the term is unspeakable. Do you think women all around the world should be concerned? The waves of anti-Semitism worldwide are on the rise, and we must combat this. There is no doubt that that case is just inconceivably horrific, and I remind you that there are now young women that are still being held hostage in Gaza. Men and women, 120 hostages. I agree fully that they must come home. We will never be complete until they come home. And I know that we will hear later on from Mirav Leshem-Bonen. And one of the really most difficult things since the beginning of the war, and we meet a lot of bereaved families and families of injured people and families that were evacuated from the north and from the south from their homes. And these are very emotional meetings, but the most emotional and profound are the ones with the families of the hostages. And the connection that I was making, I can say about Mirav personally. I met Mirav for the first time on a Wednesday, on that same, the Wednesday immediately after that horrific Saturday. That was the first initial meeting with families of the handicapped in the President's house. Since then, of course, the contact has become, sadly, a lot more personal, because so much time has elapsed, and when we know people and talk to them, you get connected to them. And then I met grandmother Dvorah, who's Romi's grandmother and Mirav's mother, and I met her sisters, and I met the family, and an amazing family, and you meet these amazing women in this family, such powerful women, and we need these young women. And I'm going to say something that I really find unsettling. At the end of the day, the transaction, the deal that may be happening or isn't happening or should be happening, certainly at least its first stage, its first round, is supposed to bring those first young women that are now in hell, to bring them home. But I can't see around the decision-making tables, around the negotiation tables, even one woman, even one mother. And I'm not an expert on strategy, I'm not an expert on negotiation, but I don't understand the logic of it. It seems irrational that the female voice, thinking a bit differently than men, yes, that women's voices are not in the room, not taken into consideration. So I would very much like to hear our voices, women's voices in the decision-making room around the table. I think that's very, very important. That's an enormously important point. Thank you. Thank you for stating that. And I wish there will be more women who are decision makers in the upper echelons. But next I want to ask you, the Poland movie about Elia Cohen is going to be shown today. I don't know if you've already seen it. I know that at the moment we're just about to see or not see it. Everybody can decide. What do you think of this decision about the specific film? I think that, and I maybe quote Rachel Pauline Goldberg, that again, as I said about Merav, these are women that had a completely private life until October 7. They were just people living their lives. And now meet Rachel, Hirsch's mother, who's an amazing woman. She's a protector of her son, standing on every stage in the world and screaming out, but doing so with intelligence and force. And if she decided, because up until recently Rachel herself didn't want to see the video, and she said yesterday in the United States, she was talking about the ignorance of the Americans as well, that they don't understand here 8 hostages are US citizens. And it has to be a concern of the entire world. And this decision to publish the video, the film, is a very powerful one. Like Joe and Yilorim, the decision of making the movie, The Screams Before Silence, that we'll see a little bit of it soon, led by Sheryl Sandberg. Every such tool is important. Every such means of making the voices of women heard, those hostages, and bring them home. Amen. It's unsurprising that we end this with a kind of a bit teary-eyed, but yes, thank you so much for all you've done. Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you. Now we will see a segment of the documentary film Screams Before Silence, and then there will be about the violence of the Hamas against women on the 7th of October. It depicts the sexual violence and atrocities in their surprise attack on Israeli citizens, and specifically the women that were taken hostage into the Gaza Strip during that attack.
A lot of the bodies were naked, totally.
We saw that some of it was sexual in nature, directly targeted sexual violence.
I heard a girl scream and ask for them to stop.
Her face was on the ground and she was raped.
He's dragging her by the hair and she's handcuffed behind her back and she looks terrified and her pants are blood-stained.
She was naked from her waist down, bruises all over her body.
כשרותה בנו, כולם היו ערומות, מישהו הפשיט אותם, מישהו התעלל בהם.
They were using sexual violence as a tool of war, of weaponizing women.
They were sent with clear instructions to rape as many, to humiliate as many.
We are ready for the unthinkable possibility of pregnancies.
פשוט הגוף שלך הוא פתוח לכלל. יכולים להעיר אותך באמצע הלילה ולאנוס אותך, וכל הזמן האקדח מכוון לראש.
That was the first thing I feared. Being raped. Being sexually assaulted. I remember the entire time I was like thinking, okay, you knew it's gonna happen. It's really happening. It's really difficult to talk about, but it's my calling, it's my duty to come out and talk.
What can we say after viewing that? The heart, the soul cringe. It's difficult to encapsulate that. Now we will hear a special message from Sheryl Sandberg, founder of the Sandberg Goldberg Bernthal Family Foundation, the person who was at the lead of this project to create this film.
It's such an honor that Screams Before Silence is being shown at Reichman University's Herzliya conference. I'm so grateful for your support and commitment to standing against sexual violence. This has become the most important work of my life because the politics of today and the polarization we face are making us turn a blind eye to something that should be completely obvious. Sexual assault is never okay. Sexual violence is never okay. Rape is never and will never be resistance. This film gives anyone and everyone the opportunity to bear witness, to say that this should never happen again, to say that the perpetrators must be held accountable, to scream after silence.
And now, we will have a conversation with the executive producer of Screams Before Silence. And I'm honored to invite Joy Low, founder of Israel at Heart and Start Farm Ventures. Please, Joy, join us. So as you can see, I'm holding the interview. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Roni, by the way. So Joy, we know each other like more than 20 years, I think, right?
That's correct. We're very proud of that.
Yeah, me too. So, and I'm always amazed by how you always there for Israel. And it's always amazed me about everything that you're doing for Israel. So just let's talk about the movie. Why did you make this movie?
Let's say I love Israel. I've loved Israel pretty much all my life. I came and I spent my junior year of college here in 1971-72 at Hebrew University, and I was a volunteer in the Yom Kippur War, and so I always have loved Israel. What's bothered me is the way the media presents Israel, and those of us who love Israel, who care about Israel, are very not only disappointed and upset, angry at times. And when the war started, October 7th, again, that feeling arose in me, is why isn't the world paying attention to this? This is happening in our country. It felt as if we were all raped, we were all violated, we were all subjected to such horrible behavior, and where was the world speaking up? Where was the world standing with us? And so I think that's pretty much where the feeling came from. And then from Castina, Manny Aviram, and Eitan Schwartz, who I knew from the Shagrir, the ambassador show, they came up with the idea, and to me it sounded like a perfect thing to support. My wife actually came up with the idea of Sheryl Sandberg. They were thinking of who could be the person to do the interviewing. I asked my wife, which is a smart thing to do, and she suggested Sheryl Sandberg, and luckily I called my good friend Tom Nides, who is the ambassador here, who I think knows everybody, and I said, would you call her and see if she would be willing to do it? And 5 minutes later, he called me back, and he said she would love to do it, and that was really just the beginning. And she's put her heart, her soul, and we have to be honest and realize that without her, it never would have gotten the mileage that it's gotten and the viewership that it's gotten. She's a very special person, and as she said, everything in her life has led her to this moment. And we speak pretty much, pretty often, and she's consumed with this. And that's for our benefit, and for, I think from Israel's point of view, the fact that, we've translated it into, 12, 13 different languages, and I really think it's important that the world see this and understand who Hamas really is, because the media doesn't always do a good job at showing it.
How many people already watched the movie?
Well, the short versions, about 35 million people have seen the trailers, and then the actual 50-something minute movie, that's the documentary, that's about over 2 million people. And hopefully now that we've sent it around the world on YouTube, that many more people will see it. It's Arabic and Russian, French, German. We did it in Mandarin, Korean. And so I'm hopeful that many more people will see it. I happen to believe that there's a lot more people in the world who love Israel, respect Israel, and care about Israel. Unfortunately, that's not what the media covers. And so the movie was, in a sense, a way to show all those people what's happening here, like an honest portrayal of what's happening. We didn't take any money from the government. That was very important to me, that this be something that be totally independent, and that it comes from the people who suffered, and they speak about their experiences, and it's very moving to see that. So I'm hopeful that we really just started, and luckily having Michal and having so many people stand up and support the movie is what's really given it its opportunity to be seen and heard, showing it so many times, screening it in so many places. We screened it at the Foreign Ministry last week, and all these diplomats came. This is very important, and I don't think we could have done that without, your friend Sheryl Sandberg, and has become a good friend of mine as well. It's important that we have people like that around the world who stand with us, as opposed to those who were quiet and didn't say anything, and it's shameful. And we should all remember, I think that's very important to me, remember those who stood with us and those who were silent. I think that's very important because it's a time like this where you learn who are your friends and who aren't your friends. Who are the people who are willing to stand up and say, I'm with you, and who are the people who were silent. And for me, I don't forget things like that. I mean, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but that's my nature. I remember, and I think that's something that we all should do.
Tell us a little bit about the influence of the movie. How it you feel that this movie...
Well, luckily I've gone to a few of the screenings. I know that when we were at the Foreign Ministry, I had a nice, warm conversation with the Singapore ambassador, and he just came to Israel recently. And he said if he was in Singapore, he never would have heard about it, he never would have seen it, and this was an opportunity. And I think that's the point, is to let people see how evil Hamas is. We know it here. We know it, we feel it, but around the world, the media has done a very good job at suppressing what really happened. And they do a very good job of PR, the pro-Palestinian groups, the demonstrators that you see all over the world, every day. It's even upsetting to watch the last night in New York, yesterday it was in California at a synagogue. You see the praying that's going on in Ontario, in Copenhagen, in streets in New York. This is very, very dangerous. And so we have to stand up. We have to let people know who this is out there, because maybe they came for us first, but this isn't their final stop. They have other things in mind.
So it was difficult to work on the movie?
I'd say, I'm very lucky. Like in life, it's all about the people that you meet along the way and the people who you share a network with. And so Manny Aviram and Eitan and the team of people who actually made the movie, I went along to watch and I listened to the interviews, but it really wasn't something that I had to do. So in that sense, I was very lucky just to be connected to it. I said to Manny, I was just very privileged that you asked me. Because, if you don't get asked, then you don't know about something. I think what's very important is a lot of initiatives were taken by Israelis after October 7th. Very often we wait for the government, or you assume that the government is going to do the things that they should do. What we learned here in Israel is there are so many amazing Israelis who jumped into action and take it upon themselves to do what perhaps the government, because its bureaucracy sometimes, isn't as capable of doing as quickly. So the same was true with our movie. Once they asked me, I said, let's go. And then we called her, and then she came. And she came with her parents and her daughter. And the interest and the dedication of people all over Israel. What I love, we come from New York. We made Aliyah here 5 years ago. What I love about being in Israel is the solidarity that you have with everyone. Wherever you go, you see people, you hug everybody, because we're in something all together. We're in a big battle. And we understand it. When I'm back in New York, you don't get it. People just don't understand it the same way. When people come here, that's why it's so important for people to come and visit Israel. When they come here after moments, they see the way that everyone is affected by what's happened to us. I was speaking to our ambassador, Tom, when he came here the first time, And, you know, he was telling me Israel should do more about the humanitarian situation. We should help more with this. And I said, Tom, you don't understand. This country was really badly hurt. And it's a trauma that we're all feeling. And so it's not the first thing for us to right away be able to get over that and jump to the next stage. Yes, you're right, we should do that. And maybe it was a mistake we didn't do it earlier. But I don't think people understand to the extent that Israel has been damaged in a way, our psyche. And so hopefully we'll rebuild and we'll you know, be able to come out of this stronger in certain ways because of this, hopefully.
So thank you very much, Joy. Really, it was been a pleasure like always.
Thank you very much,
so
Ronnie.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I have the honor to invite Merav Leshem Gonen. In these days, she's better known as the mother of Romi Gonen, who was taken hostage to Gaza too long ago, 260 days ago. She's a mother of 5 good people, and on October 7, since then, she has been fighting to bring her daughter Romi back and all of the hostages back, and also to bring back the trust and faith of Israeli society back to where it should be. Good afternoon. I usually like to speak sort of freely, but there's a lot of you, and I'm a bit sort of tense, and it is a very serious event, prestigious event that I'm very happy to be part of. And yeah, a bit of nerves because it's been 262 days, but I also have a message that I want you to take home with you, and that's why I decided to write it down. I don't usually write it down, but it was written down kind of associatively, so maybe it'll be like, so an afternoon of sunlight. It's Monday, the 24th of June, 2024, and it is now Now it is 262 days. I wrote that number wrong. I wrote 162, but it's 262. 262 days in which my daughter, Romi, who's beautiful and funny and wonderful and very Israeli, and another 119 hostages are still held by pure evil, the organization of terror, the Hamas. 262 days now. We have been every single second fighting to bring their home, working night and day around the world in order to make sure that all of the hostages come home. And some have come home and told their stories of the tortures that they have undergone, tortures of the mind and the body, the Hamas that's attacked us, that's infiltrated into our beautiful country, also infiltrated our souls and the bodies of women, using sexual violence as a planned act of war, a brutal act of atrocity meant to humiliate and abase. Our national anthem says that we should be a free people in our country. The decision of the UN, after which the State of Israel was established, supposed to be a safe homeland for Jews around the world, these two promises were broken in one day when pure evil crossed our borders, infiltrated our land, and it took violently over 200 women, citizens of Israel mostly, and also women of 23 other countries in the world. In 1 second, our heart was torn out of our bodies, and we all, since then, are fighting to bring back. No one prepared me as a mother for these horror scenarios in which in real time I see the kidnapping and taking hostage of my daughter, the moments themselves. There was no script, there was no manual that would have told me what to do and how to respond in those moments, and all the moments, all the long minutes and all of the hours and all of the days, the long days, the weeks after, and now months after. 8.5 months, where Romi is still not here, where 120 women who had life and dreams and plans never came home back to our country and to their own homes. Some will come back in body bags to be buried in the land in which they were born, in which they had families of their own. And through the last 8 months, I personally have felt that I am fighting for my personal resilience and security, the Romi's security and resilience of all my 5 children, and for all the families of the kidnapped and hostage and held hostage and people who were held hostages, as if they had been selected particularly so that they will provide a representation of Israeli society, and yet discovering that we're all fighting for the same thing, to rebuild as a people the feeling that we can live safely in our country, that we will become stronger and stronger, and of course, as said by President Nicholas Taib, as we become less breakable people. Anti-breakable people are not breakable, they're not fragile, but not only are they not breakable, but that every time they encounter a terrible challenge, they become even more impenetrable. And even if we haven't discovered this yet, this is the truth that we will uncover about ourselves. And that's the idea behind national resilience and personal resilience. We all become less breakable and our national resilience increases. And through the last 8 months, this has been a terrible challenge to face the fact that we, families of the hostages, so different, so diverse, with very different opinions and sometimes contradictory opinions, the difficulty of seeing any kind of deal moving ahead, 1 step ahead and then 10 steps back, the knowledge that my beloved, wonderful, beautiful daughter is there in the tunnels of the Hamas 262 days now. That is the biggest challenge we face. My own daughter, that I, as a mother, I'm responsible only for one thing, to keep her safe. That responsibility didn't happen on October 7, and I carry that pain every single day. I was often asked, what helps you hold it together, to stay positive, to be reserved? Why aren't you going crazy and screaming and shouting? So I have to say, I do scream and shout. I do get angry. Sometimes I scream and shout. That's totally normal and natural. Maybe that's another lesson in personal resilience, to accept the fact that you are human, to allow yourself to learn new things about yourself. And that is also the secret to unbreakability, that if I know that about myself, the place in which I am maybe a bit weaker, I'll be able to overcome it. The thing I learned in this fashion is that I have a civil responsibility I cannot ignore. When individuals are important in the national endeavor, their resilience becomes greater, and through that also national resilience improves, because being alone is unbearable, certainly in such a turbulent and challenging time. And in this, maybe we should again say sorry to Goldin, Asaya, Berel families. I'm sorry that we left you alone. I'm sorry that we reduced your sense of resilience and also our own national resilience, all of us collectively. This civil responsibility manifests in the fact that we can change a state reality, a national reality. And I had a kind of a pop-up message today on Twitter from the 10th of October, in which a senior official said, because that none of the people then included any kind of plans to bring the hostages home, he said, the matter of the hostages will be examined at the end of the war. Since then, of course, it's been a long time, and we've changed the goals of our fighting, and 2 goals, of course, are fighting, combating the Hamas and bringing the hostages home. And I hope we understand more and more that the return of the hostages should be the first priority.
National resilience relies on something else. At the very heart of the values of the State of Israel, all Jews and all Israelis are responsible for each other. And this understanding that we are one living human fabric. This fabric knows that it is connected and attached, even when we do not notice that. And on October 7th, we learned on our own flesh this physical connection between each and every one, the pain of those who have been raped, murdered, massacred, taken captive, and injured. This is a pain that hurts all of us. And it reminds us that it's not just pain that connects us, it's also strength and power. These values that are so important to Judaism, I have encountered very strongly in recent months. I've met population groups whom I've never met, conversations in communities far from where I live. And I met with religious and ultra-religious Jews whom I've never met before, and I met different people who are different with different expressions of Judaism, but what connects them all is the sanctity of life and the love of mankind, and the most important objective, which is bringing back the hostages. That is the tribal campfire, and this is what requires that we mobilize our personal resilience and project outside our national resilience so that we can take difficult decisions, not easy decisions, but that are in line with our values, the perception of Judaism, and the promise that we gave to our children, a free nation in our land. And on the way, we meet with enclaves of ignorance all over the world that fail to see the ramifications of October 7th in their country. They fail to see that if we normalize rape and violence against women in one place in the world in wartime, it will happen, and sooner than they think, in other places in the world. Last week, I had the privilege to realize my civic duty and to speak on behalf of the women whose voices were brutally silenced. I felt that I managed to shock them as a mother and to reprimand the Human Rights Commission of the UN and to break down their walls, and the silence that fell upon the hall was felt very powerfully. We as the State of Israel, we have the power and responsibility to serve as a light upon the nations and to show our uncompromising stance in bringing back immediately the hostages. These are the values of our Judaism: national resilience, national resilience relies on a confident and responsible and especially reliable leadership. When the individual knows that he or she can trust the leadership, that they stand behind their words, and that promises generate matching actions, and that leads to national resilience. We are witnessing historic moments in which we will all have to decide how we make sure that our leaders live up to their promises, that a promise made a short while ago, an agreement achieved a short while ago will indeed be realized and will reignite our process of national security, of bringing back the security of all citizens of the State of Israel within the boundaries and borders of this country, so that once again we can become a free nation in our land. We don't have the right to remain silent, and it is our duty, those who have a voice, to protest when an elected government shows instability, and there are 120 such elected officials from the entire political spectrum, and they all share the same responsibility. I stand here with you. I stand here with you in the Herzliya conference, which is the Herzliya conference for national resilience, and it was initiated. This conference started in the year 2000. Just like my darling daughter Romy, which is the epitome of our agreement as a nation to analyze ourselves and to see ourselves as human on the one hand, just like my Romy, who knows how to laugh about herself, but also a conference that seeks to see how we as the citizens of this beautiful country are willing to assume responsibility for building our own resilience, and from there the resilience of the human fabric surrounding us, people with a shared destiny. And I will end with a sentence that I usually say because it symbolizes exactly what we all want to happen. Darkness can be expelled not with additional darkness, but by increasing the light. Let's continue to strengthen our resilience, the resilience of our nation as individuals and as a complex, and let's increase the light that will bring back to the return of our loved ones soon, today. Thank you very much.